So good morning, everybody. I'm Sébastien Jean. I'm currently working for Ocean Farmers as a director for the east coast of Madagascar. So that's a role that I recently joined, leaving Cargill, where I used to work in the seaweed industry for the last 10 years. And sorry for not being able to join you physically. I have some important meetings to attend. That's not an easy exercise not to see the people you are talking to, but I'll try to do my best. So in that particular presentation, I'll tell you some information about the status of seaweed production in Madagascar. Here on that slide, I'm going to give you a bit of context for the two major red seaweed producing countries in East Africa, Madagascar and Tanzania. Basically, those two countries account for 5% of the global farmed red seaweed production. So here I'm talking basically cottony and spinosum. Madagascar on this side is still a very small player in the industry. It produces slightly over 1%. The major part of that production is cottony, Capaficus alvarezi. That accounts for 1% of the total production of cottony in the world. So yes, as I said, it's still a very small production. And Tanzania on this side, if you look at those total farmed red seaweed production, it accounts for 4% of the total cottony and spinosum produced. Nevertheless, if you look at spinosum only, Tanzania is a relatively big player as it produces 20% of that global production. So as you can see, those two countries together, they are still a very small portion of what is produced in Philippines and Indonesia, which still accounts for 90%. Nevertheless, I believe that those two countries has a great potential. There are some great areas to farm. There are some people also motivated to farm. And I'm pretty convinced that those two countries will play a key role in the industries in the years to come. And so that's why also I joined Ocean Farmers a couple of months ago. Now, on that particular slide, I'm going to tell you a little bit more on the history of Madagascar with seaweed. As you saw on the previous slide, so the country is still a very small player to date. Nevertheless, it has a long history with seaweed, starting in 1966. So at that time, there was some wild harvest of unidentified species coming from Fort Dauphin lying at the south tip of the island. And then a bit later, in the mid-80s to early 90s, there was still some wild harvest of about 3,000 tons of Gelidium madagascariensis and 5,000 tons of Euchima denticulatum and Capaficus striatus. So at that time, those two last species were some native strains for the country. And the Gelidium was harvested in Fort Dauphin, and the cottony and spinosum were harvested from the Tuléar area, which lies on the southwest of the island. And those three species were exporting to Japan for the Gelidium madagascariensis and to France for the spinosum and the Capaficus striatus. Then, in 1990, there was the start of cultivation in the southwest around Tuléar using native species of Euchima denticulatum and Capaficus striatus, but with very little success due to the poor growth of those strains. And then in the late 90s, both Capaficus alvarezi, coming from Tanzania at that time, the Tambalang strain, was introduced in Madagascar. And then the production started to pick up with a company called Biomad. A bit later, in 1998, we had the launch of the FED ARPL project, using those imported varieties and working with 4 different operators. One being located in the southwest, in Tuléar, one in the west, in Majanga and Nosy Be, and the last being based on the east coast, on the island of Nosiancao. At the end of that project, in the year 2001, there was only one operator left, which was Ibis Madagascar. So I participated to that adventure and for 6 years, where we grew the production to significant levels till reaching 1,860 tons in 2009. And I also participated with Ibis Madagascar to the introduction of spinosum in the year 2006 around Diego Suarez area in the northern tip of Madagascar. And then we transferred those seaweeds to Ampas Mader, which was closer to the historical site of Nosiancao. And we managed to reach a bit more than 600 tons production in 2010. Then I left that particular company, and a couple of years later, in 2010, so Ibis Madagascar had a major EFA crisis, and they never managed to face that crisis, as they were the only operator in that area, and the production dropped in 2 years to almost zero. And after that, the production in 2010 started again in the southwest around the Tuléar area to almost reach the production that was produced in 2009. And Ocean Farmers, which is the company I'm now working on, was leading that effort and is now accounting for 75% of the total cottony production in the country. And after 2012 till today, new operators started to come in, all located on the east coast of Madagascar, where seaweeds grows better. And here we are talking of Naturalg, close to Antala area. Then we have Aromalg, which is a bit south of Naturalg. And we have 3 operators that started operating on the island of Sainte-Marie. Sovalg first, Madaalg, and SPSM, all accounting for small volumes, as they are still relatively new players. On that next slide, I'm going to show you 20 years. On that next slide, I'm going to show you 20 years of seaweed production in Madagascar. So let me start with spinosum, which today accounts for 300 tons in the country. Ibis Madagascar, the historical player, is still the one producing those 300 tons of spinosum in Ampas Mader, which is close to Nosiancao, the island I mentioned before. So it started in 2006, where I was the person introducing the spinosum in Diego Suarez. We had quickly an exponential growth based on the experience we had previously with cottony. And then we reached a plateau around 600 tons. At that time, we were a bit limited by the size of the site we were operating. So we continued for a couple of years producing those levels. And then we also suffered from the EFA crisis that triggered the cottony production a couple of years before. And then it never fully recovered, as today the production, as you can see, is still around 300 tons. There is no more players that are playing within this particular spinosum market, as it is still at a lower value than cottony, and the cottony here grows best as compared to Tanzania, where they are really suffering to grow cottony. So that's also one reason why you don't see the spinosum production growing further. Now, if you look at the cottony production, so it really was a difficult start around the year 2000-2001. It was a new activity for Ibis Madagascar, so they really suffered from lack of knowledge at that time. But starting in 2003, we really started to get that knowledge and skills to grow seaweed. We also were confident with the model we implemented, which is still the one used by Ocean Farmers. And then the production grew significantly till the year 2009. We reached almost 2,000 tons. And unfortunately, we suffered from EFA that was completely new and unknown in Madagascar, and in 2 years, the production dropped. Then, from this crisis, the company decided to get away from the cottony production. They still maintain a small activity for spinosum, and then were more focused in developing an hotel that is quite famous in Madagascar, and that explains why you don't see the production picking up significantly again after 2011, as Ocean Farmer was the new player, the new dominant player who starting the seaweed industry in the southwest around the Tulia region, and then gaining from the experience of the previous operators, they implemented a similar model which they've been improved and contributed to a significant increase of the production, with a small drop in 2018, also related to their first EFA crisis in the southwest. But from that initial crisis, they really managed to handle that very well, and today they are almost getting to the 2,000 tons that were produced in 2009. There is also a small contribution from the other players, but still it is still very limited. Now on that next slide, you can visualize the island of Madagascar and all the different players that are active now. As you can see, Ocean Farmers is still the largest one, producing 100% cottony and having that model of smallholder contract farming. They are working on a coastline of about 300 to 400 kilometers on more than 34 villages, and they are supporting and coaching slightly over 1,700 farmers, which are producing more than 1,500 tons today. Then, on the northern tip of the island, on the east coast, you still have the historical player, Ibis Madagascar, mainly producing spinosum, about 200 tons today in that Ampasmader area. And they are trying to start again some cottony production, but in very limited volumes for now. So they are unfortunately accounting for only 1% of the production today. And then you have all the other operators that are on the east coast. As I mentioned earlier, Naturalg and Aromalg that are slightly south of Antala. Naturalg having a mixed model of company farming and smallholder farming. They are accounting for about 10% of the production today. Aromalg, which is having a smallholder farming approach, accounting for 5% of the production in the country. And Sainte-Marie becomes a major hub for seaweed farming, so all operators are farming cottony. And here you have Sauvalg, the historical one on the island, having a mixed model of company farm and smallholder contract farming. They account today for about 9% of the production of the country. And the two last, Madagalg and SPSM Alg. SPSM Alg having a smallholder contract farming, being based on what Ocean Farmers is doing. So SPSM started in January 21, so they are relatively new, and that's the reason why they are accounting for less than 1%. And Madagalg, they started operating a bit earlier, but at a very small scale so far, and they are also at less than 1% of the total production. On that particular slide, I'm going to tell you a bit more about the models that I've been talking and used by the different operators in Madagascar. So basically here, we don't have free market model as you can have in Indonesia and Philippines. There are two models that are practiced here in Madagascar. The most common one being the smallholder contract farming model, where the seaweed company, like Ocean Farmers, provide support to the seaweed farmer, such as coaching with technicians being in the field, sustainable farm inputs such as galvanized stakes for the farms, and also the company is taking all the financial risks. So the farmers has a guaranteed price and market for its seaweed, and a strong incentive from the seaweed company to grow more if the farmer performance allows it. The particularity also of that model is a contract that is established between the seaweed farmer and the seaweed company, with some engagements from the seaweed farmer and from the seaweed company. So those engagements from the farmer sides is the use of farming inputs that are provided by the seaweed company, is also about respecting the best farming practices, respecting the environment. And on the other side, the company guarantees a fixed price, also supports the farmers with some skilled technicians, so they can develop skills over time and improve their performance, and hopefully getting better returns over time. On the other side, you have the company farm, where you also have a relation between the seaweed operator and the persons that is taking care of the seaweed in the water. But the main difference here is that the person working in the seaweed farm is an employee from the seaweed operator. So there is a contract, but this is basically a traditional working contract with a fixed salary, and so there is no freedom, neither incentive for the employee to adjust his efforts to earn more. So that model is working in some areas, but you basically see that most of the operators that are using that model are not having that model only. It is a mixed model between the company farm and the smallholder contract farming. And why that? Because when the employee sees that he can earn more farming the seaweed himself, he tends to move to the smallholder contract farming system. And finally, to complete that brief presentation on Madagascar, I have made a couple of slides with some pictures, so you'll be able to visualize some different companies and the way they work. So on that next slide, these are some pictures of the historical player, Ibis Madagascar, where you can see the seaweeds in the water from the sky, with all the fields there on the sandy areas. You can visualize how big the seaweed gets in this particular side on the east coast of Madagascar, and the boats that were also given to the farmers, the farming material. And here you can have a glimpse of what harvest look like on a good day. Here, that's Impasse Madère, so the site where we were farming spinosum. So you can see also how huge were those seaweeds. And finally, a quick glimpse of ocean farmers' operations in the southwest of Madagascar, with some happy farmers, technicians supporting the seaweed farmers. Women, also a lot of women involved in the activity, and some skilled technicians that are really supporting that model and the significant growth of the production over the last years. And last, yes, I believe seaweed farming is a great opportunity for Madagascar, and I hope that that model, that sustainable model, will continue to grow in the years to come. So thank you, everybody. Sorry, I'm a bit over time, but yeah, it's, as I mentioned earlier, it's not an easy exercise, and I hope you like it. Okay, thank you, bye-bye.